She wore rubber gloves and carried a bucket. No one had ever asked her name. In the office of one of the richest men in the country, Alicia was invisible. Until the day he, arrogant and laughing out loud, mocked a foreign language document, offering $45,000 to anyone who could translate it. None of the lawyers knew. None of the executives. But the cleaning lady raised her hand. Marcelo Souza was the kind of man who carried not just numbers in his bank account, but contempt in his eyes. For him, wealth wasn't just an achievement, it was a pedestal. And from that pedestal, he looked at Alicia, the janitor, the way one looks at dust, something to be swept away, not noticed. Marcelo's problem wasn't money itself, but what he believed money made him. And when someone truly believes they are better than others just because of their bank balance, the world becomes merely a backdrop, and people, extras. The way he treated the cleaning staff said far more about him than it did about them. Marcelo would walk past Alicia without ever looking her in the eye, as if she were part of the carpet, something meant to serve, without a name, without a story, without worth. That veiled arrogance, or often blatantly open, is common in places where power is poorly managed. You've seen that boss who demands respect but offers no humanity in return? Exactly. The respect Marcelo demanded was built on bricks of fear, not admiration. But what he didn't know was that behind that simple uniform was a woman with a story as rich as his fortune. Alicia watched silently, but every word, every look of disdain, was noted in an invisible notebook. And while Marcelo believed he was above it all, he had no idea that life, with elegant irony, was about to show him just how unstable the top can be. It all began with an elegant envelope, sent from abroad and delivered straight to Marcelo's desk. The sender was European, the seal old, the paper official. Inside, a stack of documents, filled with strange letters, in a language no one could decipher. Marcelo flipped through the pages with a furrowed brow, annoyed that he couldn't understand a single word. For a man used to quick answers and absolute control, this enigma was an intolerable nuisance. He felt challenged, and for someone like him, that was almost an insult. Curiously, no one at the company could identify the language. Not the executives, not the interns, not even the analysts with stamped passports and Ivy League MBAs. So Marcelo did what he always did. He masked insecurity with arrogance. He slapped the table and made a mocking proposal, $45,000 to anyone who can translate this garbage. The room, once tense, filled with nervous chuckles, not because it was funny, but because humiliation was dressed up as opportunity. To Marcelo, it was just another game. Another way to show who was in charge, who could toss money around for fun. He didn't offer the reward as an incentive, but as a mockery. And while the executives exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh or try, a quiet figure, with a rag in her hand and cheap headphones in her ears, heard every word and locked eyes on the envelope. Because sometimes, the answers you're searching for are not where logic points. Marcelo couldn't settle for having power. He needed to parade it. Holding the documents, he stood in the middle of the office like he was carrying a trophy. "Here it is, gentlemen. The riddle of the century," he shouted, spinning the papers in the air like useless flies. The gesture was theatrical, almost comical, but laced with subtle poison, a public humiliation disguised as a challenge. As if to say, "You're all useless, and I can prove it." The staff, caught between shame and fear, laughed. But not truly. It was that forced laughter typical of toxic workplaces, where silence can seem like rebellion. No one wanted to be the only one not laughing at the boss's joke. So they played along too, offering uneasy glances and hollow smiles. The $45,000 offer didn't sound generous. It felt like provocation. A bet he knew no one would win. The humiliation was collective and deliberate. Amid the controlled chaos, Alicia, as always, was sweeping the floor near the entrance. She pretended not to hear, but every word that came from Marcelo's mouth sank deeper than anyone could guess. As he laughed, she mentally noted the symbols she had glimpsed on the pages, as if decoding an ancient script through the eyes of experience. Because sometimes, what seems invisible is precisely what holds the answer. Then came an unexpected voice that cut through the noise. It came from the corner of the room, calm, but firm. I can try to translate it. It was Alicia, the cleaning lady, the one who had always gone unnoticed, now standing before the owner of the company and his audience. The silence that followed was almost uncomfortable. Everyone turned at once, as if they'd heard an out-of-place joke. And, in fact, that's exactly how they reacted, with mocking laughter, as if she had lost her mind. A polyglot janitor? That's a new one, someone whispered, and the comment echoed louder than it should have. Marcello, with a crooked smirk, approached like someone amused by a clown in his private circus. To him, it was entertainment. A comic act in the middle of the workday. You translate this? What, did you learn linguistics scrubbing floors? He laughed openly, hoping she would back down in shame. But Alicia didn't retreat. She just stared at him, and for the first time, he felt small. He handed her the papers like bait. He expected her to hesitate, to stumble over the words, to back off once she saw the complex symbols. It was a cruel way of reasserting his superiority. Marcello wanted a show. He wanted to see the fall of someone who had never even been allowed to rise. But what he didn't know is that some kinds of wisdom don't make noise, they simply wait for the perfect moment to silence an entire room. Without asking permission, Alicia took the documents from Marcello's hands. Her face remained calm, not prideful, but with a quiet confidence no one had ever seen in her. The first few seconds brought murmurs, stifled chuckles, and an expectation of failure, but it never came. Instead, words flowed effortlessly from her mouth in a strange melodic language that, for many, was utterly indecipherable, Hungarian. She read it like she was telling an ancient story, with rhythm, clarity, and authority. Laughter gave way to shock. A thick silence took over the room. The sound of the vacuum cleaner turning off in the background was the only thing that broke the weight of the moment. Marcello, frozen, tried to grasp what was happening. It felt like the ground beneath him had changed shape. For the first time, laughter died in his throat. No one dared to interrupt Alicia. It was impossible to ignore. She truly spoke the language. Not like someone who knows a few words, but like someone who had lived with it in her soul. And then, without embellishment, she translated the core message of the document. Marcello had inherited a fortune of $15 million. An inheritance from a distant relative in Hungary. The amount was real. The opportunity, legitimate. But the most striking thing wasn't the number. It was who had revealed the fortune. The woman he had humiliated. The employee he had never even seen. And as everyone tried to process the weight of the revelation, something even greater was about to come to light. All eyes remained fixed on Alicia as she calmly began to speak about herself. Not with vanity, but with the firmness of someone who no longer owed anyone an explanation. Before all this, I was a university professor, PhD in linguistics, legal translator. I worked for years at the Hungarian consulate as head of international communications. The words sounded unbelievable to those who had only ever known her in an apron and rubber gloves. But there was no doubt. She spoke with authority, backed by a resume that many in that room would never come close to, even in suits and ties. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. She explained that she had been removed from her academic position after exposing a corruption scheme inside the university where she taught. They didn't welcome her courage. They tried to silence her. And when they failed, they did what so many broken systems do. They blacklisted her. Alicia's name was burned. No school, no law office, no embassy wanted her anywhere near them again. And that's how a woman fluent in 5 languages and holding academic titles found herself rejected by every door that once seemed open. So I took what I could, she said, glancing down at the floor she cleaned every day. My daughter was sick. And a mother does whatever it takes. The silence in the room had shifted. It wasn't shock anymore, it was reverence. For the first time, they looked at Alicia for who she really was. Not just intelligent, but resilient, brave, dignified. And even with all that truth pouring from her, she still kept her eyes low, because the world doesn't always forgive those who carry truth in their chest. But in that room, something was about to change. The air in the room shifted. Not because of the AC, but because, for the first time, power had changed hands. Alicia didn't need to raise her voice, slam the table, or wear a suit to command the room. Her presence, once ignored, was now the center of everything. Marcelo, who minutes earlier had mocked her very existence, now found himself cornered. The $15 million inheritance depended on her, the woman he had humiliated in front of everyone. And he knew it. Without Alicia, the fortune would be lost in a maze of unreadable papers and legal deadlines. She didn't shout, accuse, or seek revenge. She simply looked at him with calm firmness and said, "You made a public offer. I want the $45,000. It was direct, emotionless. Not a plea, a negotiation. Not because she needed the money, but because he had promised it, out loud, like someone tossing empty words into the wind. And now those words carried weight. Marcelo swallowed hard. The man who once tossed money around like crumbs was now held accountable, or risked losing a far greater fortune. The most disconcerting part, however, was her composure. Alicia wasn't demanding more than what was owed. She didn't ask for public apologies or seek to humiliate him in return. She only wanted what was fair. It was as if she were saying, without saying it at all, "I don't have anything to prove. You're the one who has something to learn." And in that moment, surrounded by the stunned stares of his employees, Marcelo realized the world has a funny way of spinning, and that sometimes the very ground you walk on today could be the same ground that swallows you whole tomorrow. Alicia sat at the conference table with the same calm she'd had pushing a cleaning cart hours earlier. But now, with the documents before her, she revealed herself as something rare, fast, meticulous, flawless. Every line was translated with fluency and precision, as if that language had been hers since birth. No dictionary, no hesitation. She read, interpreted, and rewrote with the authority of someone who understands subtext, essential for legal and diplomatic documents. She wasn't just fluent, she was an expert. Meanwhile, the executives, those who once looked down on her, now exchanged silent, embarrassed glances. None of them could do what she was doing, and certainly not with such poise. Alicia didn't flaunt her brilliance. She simply demonstrated it. With elegance, with restraint, and with the silent strength of someone who knows exactly who she is. She drafted the official reply to the consulate, prepared the legal documents for dispatch, and even guided Marcelo through the next steps in the international succession process. The greatest surprise, however, wasn't just her technical skill, it was the brutal contrast between what people expected of her and what she delivered. A woman who had spent months being invisible was now indispensable. But more than that, she was respected. Because respect isn't imposed through orders or titles, it's earned through dignity, competence, and truth. And that's what Alicia brought to that room. Not just a translation, but a living lesson. Appearances are not a measure of worth. And even with all her excellence, something even greater was still to come. The silence among her co-workers had become thick, filled with weight and regret. The same people who once laughed at the idea of a polyglot janitor now avoided eye contact, ashamed of their own words. Mariana, who used to make jokes in the break room, now stared only at the floor. Amanda, who had secretly recorded the initial challenge on her phone, clutched the device in her hands, unsure whether to delete or share it. And Roberto, the one who prided himself as the intellectual guy in the office, now sat speechless. Because nothing he knew could explain what he had just witnessed. What Alicia had done wasn't just impressive, it was revealing. With grace and firmness, she exposed how quickly we judge those below us. Her performance was a cruel mirror held up to every face in that room. Suddenly, it was painfully clear how sneaky social prejudice really is. It wears disguises, as jokes, as casual remarks, as, "I didn't mean anything by it." But when truth arrives with force, prejudice loses its mask. It was more than regret, it was a confrontation with their own conscience. Each person there had to face the fact that they had underestimated her solely because of her role. Marcello's expression was no longer one of superiority, but discomfort. The silent hierarchy of that office had crumbled, not through force, but through merit, through truth. And those who once saw Alicia as a shadow in the background, now saw her as a light that was difficult to look at. Because what she revealed wasn't just her own brilliance, it was the mediocrity of those who chose to laugh instead of respect. And while everyone processed that in their own way, what came next would leave even deeper marks. Marcello stood frozen, as if time had slowed around him. For the first time, the weight of his actions began to settle in his chest, even if reluctantly. He wasn't the kind of man to admit fault easily, but in the silence of that room, his arrogance seemed to dissolve. The way he had treated Alicia, the cold dismissals, the sharp words, flooded his memory with painful clarity. It was hard to accept, but impossible to deny. He had made her invisible. In his mind, scenes from the past flashed like uncomfortable movie clips. He remembered walking past her without so much as a greeting, the condescending glances, the quiet scorn. These small acts, insignificant to him, had built an invisible wall for Alicia, a locked door powered by social prejudice. It was a moment of reckoning. Marcello felt a lump in his throat, a mix of shame and regret he had never felt before. But the most important thing wasn't the emotion, it was the awakening. That realization was like a seed planted in dry soil that, if nurtured, could blossom into real change. That moment wasn't just about Alicia, it was about Marcello himself, and his journey to see beyond appearances, to recognize human value where he once saw only position. And as he wrestled with that internal transformation, the next chapter of the story began to unfold for them both. Alicia, once ignored by everyone, now stood tall with a strength no one could question. Her voice was calm, but carried immense weight, the weight of knowledge, experience, and dignity earned through daily struggle. She didn't need a spotlight to shine. Her intellect spoke louder than any expensive suit or empty title. In a room where power had always been confused with status, Alicia proved that true worth lies in substance, not appearance. While many in the room were still struggling to process this dramatic turn of events, Alicia continued to prove, through actions, not speeches, that no uniform defines one's competence. The janitor from yesterday was, in truth, the key figure preventing the loss of a fortune and the collapse of an entire company. More than that, she was the only one capable of guiding Marcello through the bureaucratic and legal maze, with the precision of someone who had walked that path before. Every decision she made was living proof that knowledge, when paired with humility, becomes an unstoppable force. What once went unseen by so many was now the very strength holding up the future of them all. Alicia wasn't just an employee, she was the lifeline, the one holding the rope at the exact moment everyone else was at risk of falling. Her silent journey had become a symbol, for Marcello, for the team, and for everyone who had underestimated her. True leadership doesn't shout. It doesn't rule through fear. It is built on respect, the kind that's earned. And what came next would make that truth even clearer. Marcello never imagined that day would end with him at the center of a public confession. The man who had always ruled with an iron fist, who crushed any challenge with arrogance, now found himself in a deeply uncomfortable position, one that required humility. In front of everyone, he took a deep breath, felt the weight of the truth, and said the words no one expected, a sincere apology. It wasn't a display of weakness, but of courage, and it changed the atmosphere instantly. With a calmer voice and humbler gaze, he acknowledged his arrogance, the mistakes he'd made, and the injustice he had inflicted on Alicia. More than just words, that moment was a sign that true power isn't in belittling others, it's in recognizing their value. Marcello made it clear that this wouldn't be an empty gesture. As proof of his transformation, he offered Alicia a new position with fair pay, recognition, and, most importantly, respect. In that office, that meant more than any dollar amount. The silence that followed was thick with emotion. For Alicia, for the staff, for Marcello, and even for those watching from the outside, that moment was proof that real power is born from empathy, humility, and justice. And as everyone absorbed that transformation, something even greater was already brewing behind the scenes, ready to take the story to another level. The shift in the air was palpable. The woman who had once been ignored and invisible was now the subject of admiring, respectful gazes. Alicia no longer had anything to prove. Her competence and dignity spoke for themselves. What once seemed like just a janitor had become the living embodiment of talent and resilience, and that echoed through every corner of the office. She had become, finally, someone people truly saw. The co-workers who had once joked or looked down on her now began to approach, not with empty apologies, but with genuine recognition. Mariana, Amanda, and Roberto were the first to step forward, their words laced with shame and a sincere desire to make things right. The group apology wasn't just symbolic, it was a tangible sign that change was possible if there was enough courage to face the past. They wanted her to know they saw her now for who she truly was, valuable, essential. That moment became a turning point for the whole team. It was no longer about hierarchy or job titles, it was about humanity and respect. The social prejudice once masked as jokes or subtle gestures lost its grip in the face of a simple but powerful truth. No one deserves to be invisible. And as that transformation echoed through the halls, the next chapter of the story approached, bringing with it new challenges and lessons for everyone involved. Alicia listened to Marcelo's proposal carefully, but didn't let herself be swayed by the emotion of the moment. Her decisions weren't driven by pride, but by responsibility. With the same calm she used to translate complex legal documents, she responded to his offer with firm, respectful clarity. Yes, she would accept the role, but on her terms. The power had shifted, and she knew exactly what she needed. No vague promises. No improvisation. Alicia wanted transparency, respect, and, most of all, continuity where it mattered. Her first condition was unexpected. She wanted to work part-time. Not out of convenience, but to personally train the person who would take over her former position. No one should have to be trampled just because someone else gets a promotion, she said, once again showing her quiet greatness. Her second condition, the salary should be paid directly to the clinic treating her daughter. She wasn't asking for money to flaunt, she wanted to make sure her little girl continued receiving the care she needed, without delays or gaps. And finally, she insisted that everything be put in writing, with clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Alicia knew the value of a signed word, especially after everything she'd been through. She wanted a clear, fair contract. No loopholes. No room for future injustice. Her voice was firm, never aggressive, simply the voice of a woman who knew her worth and negotiated with her head held high. And as everyone watched in silence, it became clear that this wasn't just a new job, it was the beginning of a new era. With everything agreed upon and signed, Alicia finalized the documents with the same care she used to end each cleaning shift, with an eye for detail and a profound sense of responsibility. The papers were scanned, notarized, and sent to Budapest within the legal deadline. Across the ocean, the lawyers handling the inheritance didn't just receive the paperwork, they were stunned by the quality of the translation. One of them even remarked, "It's rare to see work this precise, with legal command and cultural fluency at the same time." The compliment crossed borders and landed in Marcelo's company like a small bomb of recognition. For him, it was one more confirmation of what he now knew with certainty. He had overlooked a world-class talent within his own team. For Alicia, it was just another job well done, the result of years of study, experience, and quiet dedication. But for the others, it was a reminder, true talent doesn't shout. It simply shows up. And when it does its work well, the world notices. A few days later, an email arrived directly from Budapest. The sender, an international law firm specializing in estate law and legal translation. Not only were they thanking her for the flawless materials, they were making an offer. They wanted Alicia to join them permanently, as a translator and linguistic consultant. The recognition that had been denied to her for so long was now crossing oceans. And even with this new opportunity unfolding, one final and powerful decision still awaited her. When it seemed that everything had been settled, a twist arrived with the red seal of a Hungarian notary. The official letter announced that the inheritance was being contested by newly emerged relatives of the deceased. Unknown names, distant family branches, but with a disturbing detail, all with legitimate documentation and lawyers ready. The once assured $15 million fortune was now in serious jeopardy. Marcelo, who had begun to relax, was abruptly thrown back onto the legal battlefield. The news hit the office like a bomb. The celebratory mood vanished, replaced by tension and frantic activity. Marcelo, though now humbled, was still driven by the fear of losing everything. But this time, he knew precisely who to turn to: Alicia. She understood not just the language, but also the cultural, legal, and diplomatic subtleties involved. More than that, she was the only one he truly trusted with such a delicate matter, even if he never voiced it. Alicia reviewed the documents with trained eyes, analyzing clauses, dates, and loopholes that could be challenged. Time was short, and any mistake could prove fatal. She understood the stakes, not just the inheritance, but her reputation, built over recent days. The scales of justice were tipping again, and time was the enemy. But no one anticipated that, in the midst of this new storm, Alicia would be called to do something far greater than mere translation. Faced with chaotic urgency, Alicia took the lead without waiting for orders. Not with arrogance, but with the quiet decisiveness of someone who knows what must be done. "I'll go with you to Budapest," she said, looking directly into Marcelo's eyes. It was more than a suggestion, it was a declaration of responsibility. She knew no hastily hired lawyer or translator would have her depth of understanding. It was either her, or the risk of losing everything. But this time, Alicia wouldn't act purely out of goodwill. She knew her worth, and refused to give without recognition. "I want 5% of the inheritance. For the work, the trust, and the responsibility you're placing on me." Marcelo hesitated for a second, not because of the amount, but because he'd never heard someone he once scorned negotiate so fairly. Again, Alicia demonstrated that dignity is not a favor, it's a stance. Without wasting a moment, she orchestrated the entire trip: documents, appointments, logistics, consul contacts, defense preparation. She assembled a dossier with legal arguments, identified vulnerabilities raised by the challengers, and anticipated every possible attack. Her mind worked like a chessboard, foreseeing every move. Marcelo, now utterly dependent on the woman he once dismissed countless times, grasped that what was at stake went far beyond money. And Budapest, more than a destination, was poised to become the stage of a definitive turning point. The courthouse in Budapest felt colder that day, not because of the weather, but due to the tense atmosphere that blanketed the hearing. There was something solemn in the air, the kind of silence that precedes life-altering decisions. Marcelo entered the main courtroom with a racing heart, yet purposeful steps. Beside him, Alicia moved with her usual poise, carrying more than documents. She bore the calm of someone who knows every comma in the case. She wasn't just a translator, she was the emotional and strategic fulcrum in this legal battle. The courtroom was packed: attorneys, inheritance claimants, consulate representatives, and the judge, whose gaze was focused and expression unreadable. Alicia stood by Marcelo, interpreting every question, every word, every pause. More than that, she guided his speech with subtle gestures, measured breaths, and invisible cues. Marcelo, who once mocked her presence, now relied entirely on her not to stumble before the jury. Each of his sentences passed through Alicia's filter and was delivered to the court with clarity, poise, and precision. Across the room, the challengers presented their case with veiled aggression, hoping to unbalance Marcelo. They failed. His emotional preparation from the previous days held strong. The narrative Alicia had crafted, from facts to feelings to legal argument, was as firm as steel. In a courtroom where millions were at stake, each word weighed like gold. Yet something more precious was under scrutiny: justice. And behind the tension, a final revelation was fast approaching, something no one in that tribunal was prepared to hear. At the heart of the trial was the estate of Joseph Souza, a U.S. native turned Hungarian millionaire with a personal history as complex as his fortune. Joseph died childless, leaving behind a tangled web of personal and familial relationships now converging in court. This wasn't just a legal dispute, it was a collision of memories, bonds, and versions of truth. On the right side of the courtroom, Marcelo, the officially recognized nephew, presented documents, testimonies, and the most recent will. Opposite him, two distinct forces stood with their own claims and opaque motives. Esther Nagy, a middle-aged woman with an austere look, claimed to have been Joseph's partner in his final years. She brought letters, photographs, and ambiguous statements to support her emotional bond with the deceased. There was no marriage nor civil union, but she insisted that the will favoring Marcelo was manipulated. Meanwhile, cousins Mirali and Bella Kovacs mounted a different attack, the bloodline claim. They asserted a close family connection supported by old records, aiming to invalidate the final will. Their dispute blended emotion, ambition, and conflicting interests. The judge understood that deciding this case meant weighing more than just paperwork. There were moral values at odds with technicalities, the coldness of the law versus the warmth of human intention. Alicia's presence as both translator and advisor helped balance the scales with professionalism and humanity. Each party aimed to prove not just their legal right, but their moral worth. And amid the clash, a family secret long buried in the Sousa archives began to resurface, capable of dismantling or reinforcing any argument. At the pivotal moment, Marcelo delivered his defense with calm precision, aware that each document could sway the outcome. The pivotal piece of evidence was the meticulously prepared family tree tracing a direct lineage from Joseph Sousa to Marcelo himself. It was the product of weeks of research and labor, a chain of names, dates, and family ties authenticated by the Hungarian consulate, giving it undeniable legal weight. Alongside the paperwork, a surprise element emerged, a DNA test, obtained in secret via the Medical Legal Institute. The scientific proof left no doubt about the biological link between Marcelo and the deceased. It was an undeniable confirmation, sealing the credibility of his claim. This strategy had been orchestrated by Alicia, who understood that in legal arenas, emotion must be paired with concrete evidence. The opposing lawyers tried to undermine these documents, searching for technical flaws or questioning the test's validity. Yet the rigor and transparency of the process, and Alicia's impeccable translation, dispelled any doubts. Marcelo wasn't merely showing proof, he was demonstrating an almost unassailable truth. As courtroom tension rose, everyone awaited the judge's final decision, which would determine the fate of both the estate and the man who had once been invisible. But the battle transcended DNA and documentation. Esther, poised and firm, introduced a delicate claim, a verbal emotional bond and a stable partnership she said Joseph honored in life. For her, affection and companionship outweighed written contracts. She alleged that the will favoring Marcelo was forged under pressure, aiming to unsettle the defense with an emotionally charged appeal. Mirali and Bella followed, calling witnesses who claimed Joseph shared close ties with them, including informal promises of inheritance. Their testimonies, however, were inconsistent, their accounts contradicting one another, opening gaps that allowed Alicia to challenge their credibility. What unfolded was a complex battle of words, recollections, and clashing motivations, testing the court's ability to navigate truth amid chaos. Alicia needed more than linguistic skill. She needed emotional intelligence to convey nuance and avoid distortion. Each statement had to be rendered precisely, preserving emotional context. In that moment, the court was deciding not just material claims, but human narratives where law met the heart. And amidst this verbal duel, the next chapter held yet another surprise that would redefine the case's dynamics. As tension spiked, Alicia proved her role extended well beyond literal translation. With her sharp mind and unique life experience, she identified details others missed. Drawing on her understanding of local culture and legal nuance, she devised a strategy to defuse Esther's and the cousins' claims. Her voice, once ignored, became pivotal in the courtroom battle that would determine the estate's fate. Alicia presented testimonies from neighbors of Joseph, who confirmed that Esther never lived with him officially, dismantling her claim of a stable partnership. She also highlighted inconsistencies in the cousins' witnesses, exposing contradictions that undermined their reliability. Every point Alicia raised dismantled opponents' versions piece by piece. Her intelligent, calm, and confident demeanor stunned everyone in the courtroom. Marcelo, who initially underestimated her, now recognized her as the real strategist on his team. Alicia didn't just translate words, she translated hidden truths, giving voice to justice. And as the judge listened attentively, The path toward the final decision began to take shape, ushering in a future none could yet foresee. During a decisive session, an unexpected document came to light: Joseph's legitimate will, written just 3 months before his death. In it, with clarity and formality, he explicitly left his entire estate to Marcello, his nephew. It was the ultimate proof, written, signed, and legally sound, that silenced the claims of all other parties. This testament revealed Joseph's final wish, made with full mental clarity and free of coercion. But that wasn't all. Alongside the will was a letter, unfinished, handwritten, and deeply human. In it, Joseph expressed regret over years of distance and unresolved family wounds. The note carried an unmistakable longing for forgiveness and reconnection, as if he understood too late how fleeting life could be. That letter moved everyone in the courtroom. It reminded them that behind wealth and legal terms, there were human stories and raw emotion begging to be honored. The reading of the letter shifted the courtroom's energy. More than establishing legal rights, it underscored the power of conscious decisions and empathy. And while the judge carefully reviewed every last document, the final decision loomed closer, now carrying not just justice, but justice with a soul. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The judge, after meticulously examining every document, testimony, and piece of evidence, entered the courtroom with a solemnity the case demanded. A heavy silence filled the room. This ruling would determine not just the fate of $15 million, but the conclusion of a story marked by conflict, emotion, and personal transformation. With a firm and steady voice, the judge announced that, based on the official documentation, the DNA test, and all supporting evidence, the inheritance would be granted to Marcello. This was more than a financial victory. It was a moment of redemption and recognition. Marcello, visibly moved, felt the full weight of that decision. Not because of the money, but because of what it symbolized: the acknowledgement of truth, dignity, and a hard-won identity. The once tense courtroom filled with a different energy, one of relief, respect, and deep reflection. For Alicia, Marcello, and everyone who had witnessed this journey, the verdict became a symbol that justice, when guided by truth and empathy, can break through prejudice and deception. But even in victory, the story still had one more chapter to tell. After the courtroom triumph, Marcello returned to the United States with a completely renewed perspective. The experience in Hungary hadn't just secured his inheritance, it had changed his understanding of leadership and values in business. He now knew that true power doesn't come from arrogance or control, but from respect, empathy, and the ability to see value in every person, regardless of their role. Determined to create lasting change, Marcello implemented a new corporate culture, one that prioritized merit, recognition, and humanity above hierarchy. As for Alicia, she stepped into a powerful and strategic role within the company. Promoted to international director, she not only received a dignified salary, but also a share in the profits, reflecting her true and indispensable value. Her journey from invisible janitor to respected leader became a source of inspiration across the company. Day by day, Alicia proved that competence, dignity, and perseverance could break any barrier. Her transformation sparked an organizational shift. Diversity, inclusion, and personal development were no longer just buzzwords. They became the foundation of how the company operated. Together, Marcello and Alicia led the business with a new purpose, where profitability and humanity walked hand in hand. And while this chapter was just beginning, their story, once rooted in prejudice and struggle, was blooming into something no one had expected: a movement of change. But the transformation in Alicia's life didn't stop there. Her daughter, Sophia, who had once faced severe health challenges and financial limitations, achieved something extraordinary. She passed first in the entrance exam for one of the top medical universities in the country. This wasn't just a dream come true. It was the living proof of everything Alicia had fought for. Thanks to the financial stability from the inheritance and her new position, Alicia was able to ensure Sophia received every necessary treatment, and more importantly, a safe and inspiring home. In that environment, where knowledge and self-worth were prioritized, Sophia flourished. Her victory wasn't hers alone. It was a shared triumph, built on years of love, sacrifice, and relentless hope. This milestone gave new meaning to Alicia's entire journey. It proved that true wealth isn't counted in dollars, it's found in opportunities, in love, and in the courage to believe in someone who just needs a chance. As Alicia and Marcelo celebrated this new chapter, the future shimmered with possibility, a happy ending made possible because someone once chose to see value where others saw nothing. After all he had experienced, Marcelo made one final decision. His company would now reflect the values he had come to believe in. He established a profit-sharing program for all employees, regardless of their job titles. This wasn't just about motivation, it was a statement that success should be collective, and that every team member mattered. But he didn't stop there. Marcelo created a scholarship fund for employees' children, knowing education was the root of long-term change, not just for individuals, but entire communities. By offering these opportunities, he recognized that human value extended far beyond the office walls. It was a legacy to be nurtured at home, in families, and in future generations. These profound shifts sparked a cultural revolution inside the company. Respect, dignity, and individual contribution became the pillars of leadership. And Marcelo, with Alicia by his side, knew this was just the beginning of a new kind of success, one where everyone rises, and true value lies not in power or prestige, but in people. The impact of the trial, and of Marcelo and Alicia's personal transformation, soon transcended borders. As recognition for their exceptional role in upholding justice and promoting human values in the business world, both were awarded honorary citizenship by the Hungarian government. The honor symbolized not just formal acceptance, but deep respect for their courage, integrity, and competence, qualities that had inspired far beyond the courtroom. What started as a bitter inheritance dispute soon became a landmark case. Law schools across Europe and the U.S. began to study it as a modern example of justice, ethics, and social equity. Professors dissected Alicia's legal strategies and Marcelo's evolution, drawing lessons that went far beyond the legal framework, lessons about humanity, humility, and transformation. For Marcelo and Alicia, the recognition was more than symbolic. It was the crowning moment of a difficult, meaningful journey. They hadn't just won a fortune. They had rewritten their own story, and opened a path for others to follow. The honorary citizenship was living proof that real legacy isn't built on money, but on respect, truth, and the bravery to challenge the status quo. Marcelo never imagined that the janitor he once looked down on would become the key to saving his fortune, and, more importantly, transforming his life. The legal battle forced him to look inward, to confront the biases and blind spots that had shaped his view of the world. Admitting he had underestimated Alicia wasn't just an act of humility. It was the turning point of a true transformation, one that would ripple through his personal and professional life. This deep reflection led Marcelo to realize that dignity and worth aren't tied to uniforms or job titles. They live in the essence of who a person is. Prejudice, often rooted in surface-level judgments, can prevent incredible opportunities from ever taking root. Marcelo began to understand that changing his mindset was the first step toward leading with humanity and justice, something Alicia had quietly modeled from the very beginning. More than just a lesson, this experience revealed the real and lasting impact of valuing the so-called invisible talents, the people the world overlooks, but who carry the potential for extraordinary achievement. And so, the story of Marcelo and Alicia became a living testament to how opening your eyes to those around you can transform not just a company, but entire lives, including your own.